Oh wow, my camera is like leaning off the tripod. Darkest Hour is the newest true story film to center around Winston Churchill and is also the most recent in releases to be in talks for a lot of Oscar nominations and possibly wins. It's directed by Joe Wright and stars the one and only Gary Oldman, backed up by the likes of Kristen Scott Thomas and Ben Mendelsohn. So I've been looking forward to seeing this movie for a while. I'm a huge Gary Oldman fan. I think he's one of the most underappreciated actors ever. He's constantly overlooked for brilliant performances he puts on, and the fact that he's only ever been nominated for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is not even one of his best performances by a long shot, is kind of depressing to me. He has put on some of the greatest performances, I think we could probably say ever, and some of the most overlooked performances ever. So it's nice to finally see him have the kind of attention that he deserves, and I was very much looking forward to seeing the movie to see if it really was that well deserved. And I have to say, it's got to be interesting and almost difficult in the sense to make a movie like this in 2017, because there have been so many movies recently about the British side of World War II. Two this year. There was Dunkirk, and there was Chruchill, which was the Brian Cox Churchill movie that nobody went and saw. And then a couple of years ago, there was The King's Speech, which is about Ben Mendelsohn's character in this movie. It's an entire movie centered around him. And so there have been so many different stories, like, in recent time. I'm not saying ever. There aren't that many when you really look at it. But I'm saying in recent times that it has to be hard to make a film that doesn't seem old and tiresome and like, okay, we've just seen this story a couple months ago. It's almost just the opposite. They do everything they possibly can to make this movie unique and interesting and stand on its own, while also, like, personally, I think this would be a fascinating film to watch back to back with Dunkirk. Like, I kind of want to do that when it comes out on iTunes, watch these two back to back and just sort of, because this is the behind the scenes and Dunkirk is like what really happened. It's kind of this really interesting, this one leads into that. And overall, in terms of my actual thoughts on the film, I think it's excellent. I thought it was very, very, very well done with minor flaws. But I walked out of this thing completely and utterly blown away, and my expectations were met, and then some. I was very pleased with the outcome of this film, and I'll get into why right now. The obvious point to talk about is Gary Oldman, and there's really no other way to start than that. Give him the statue now. Basically, that's all I really have to say. I mean, like, he is brilliant in this movie. It's very reminiscent, in my opinion, of Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln, and sort of the way that he became the character, because every little thing about Gary Oldman becomes Winston Churchill. You lose Gary Oldman completely in that, which is sort of a little different than like when I was talking about James Franco the other day, who, while embodies the character of Tommy Wiseau, I don't think he's completely transparent, or not transparent, like I don't think he completely molds into the character. Gary Oldman, in every sense of the way, becomes Winston Churchill with the look and the dialect and the mannerisms and the emotion and the heart and the change. Like, everything about him is Winston Churchill, and that's the brilliance of the performance. You're not watching a performance. You feel as though you're actually watching almost like a documentary. You're actually looking at Winston Churchill on the screen, because he did everything in his power to adopt all of it. All of it. Every little minuscule thing, like whether he's grabbing his jacket like this, or he's... The only flaw, and this was a direction thing, is there are a couple scenes where they'll have Winston, like, he's like struggling to get out of his seat, and he has to have his wife, like, help pick him up. But then there are one or two shots where he's, like, booking it down a fucking, like, a subway tunnel. And you're like, that's not... He can't do that. He is not in shape for that, or young enough to do that. To the point where a couple times I was like, is that supposed to be him? It was... I don't know. That was a little weird. It was, again, like, minor things. That happens twice that I noticed it. And one, he was, like, flying down a set of stairs. And I was like, that's not... You can't do that. But the thing is, like, that almost kind of comes as a bite in the ass, because this movie just doesn't work without him. And I don't think that's a nick against it, because I hate that. Like, when people use the Dark Knight argument of that movie doesn't work without Heath Ledger, yeah, but he's in it. Like, you can't knock a movie's quality by saying, well, The Dark Knight wouldn't have been as good if Christopher Nolan didn't direct it. Yeah, sure, but he did, and that is why it's as good. So what's your point? You know, like, am I making any sense? But that doesn't, for me, that doesn't knock any other performances by, like, the rest of the performances are all great. They just obviously don't, A, hold a candle to Gary Oldman's, or B, have as much presence or screen time or gravitas or as much to do as he does. The best one in supporting roles is Kristen Scott Thomas, who I think could be nominated for an Oscar. She's really great in this. She has kind of the ability, as a supporting actress should, to come on screen and steal the scene, and the Oscars like that, and they also like supporting performances that are really good in a short amount of screen time, which is Kristen Scott Thomas, so I think she is one to look out for a nomination. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I think it's definitely a possibility. Ben Mendelsohn is great, although it's unfortunate that, like, he has to come off of Colin Firth's Oscar-winning portrayal of that character and then kind of be on the sidelines for this movie. He's really good, but, like, he's not as good as Colin Firth, and that's, you know, whatever. Lily James, the Baby Driver girl, she's also very good, but character-wise, she's definitely the weakest. Because she's not really a character for most of it. She's sort of there to be the reactionary point to a lot of Winston's decisions and a lot of things he does, and she works really well in that regard, but then they do try and give her depth, and it was sort of the cliche, like, yeah, her brother went to war, and, you know, so this means a lot to her, and it was kind of one of those, like, yeah, I saw that coming, you know? Like, she's really good, but she's kind of a pawn in the grand scheme of things. I think there was a little more for her to do as a character, but performance-wise, she held her own. She did a very good job. The script in this movie, dialogue and character-wise, is excellent all the way around. The dialogue is witty, it's clever, it's spontaneous, it's interesting, it's new, it's fresh, and a lot of times with movies like this, you can find yourself getting lost because characters are throwing out these terms or phrases, or even, like, describing something that you would only understand if you've actually have this kind of preconceived knowledge of the history of what's going on. Oftentimes these kinds of movies make those kinds of mistakes, or not even war movies like The Big Short. Like, a lot of people went out of that movie and they were like, oh, I understood it all. I didn't. I speak for myself, I guess, but I fucking did not. But this movie does a very good job of not spoon-feeding you, but kind of giving you the information in a way that it's understandable so that you can follow the plot and be on the edge of your seat with all of the other inhabitants of Great Britain at that time. That's kind of the point, and that's what you're supposed to feel from the movie. But the script's greatest job is in the character of Winston Churchill. That's the movie's greatest strength. Not necessarily his performance, but how his performance complements the character that they built for him. His character is excellent. You understand every little bit of him. He's likable to the audience, but you also understand why certain people dislike him. You get why at the beginning of the movie all of these people are so resistant to bring him in as prime minister. Once you start seeing the way he acts, you're like, yeah, I probably would not do that either. But he can be down-packed, he can be down to business, you understand when he really is really emotional about a situation, or he really cares, but he also has this ability to be funny and charismatic and bring this sense of gravitas to the screen. He's kind of all over the place. It's a controlled chaos sort of thing, but it's done correctly. It's written correctly. That's sort of the brilliance of this movie, considering he is the primary focus of the film. That's what they really needed to do, and that works really, really, really well within this movie. And this, I know it's like not really up there right now for an original screenplay nomination, but it should take a nomination. Should it take a win? No, but it should take a nomination. The direction and the overall look of the movie is pretty fantastic, especially when you sort of get into the nitty-gritty. It's kind of amazing to think how good this movie is. Like, cinematography is beautiful, the lighting is excellent, the color is great, it always has some kind of meaning, the production design is stunning. All of it really kind of comes together, and you can sort of see this vision that Joe Wright had and how he brought it to life, and it's sort of like, it's impressive to think that you can take just sort of this true story and make it into this kind of visual piece of art that he managed to do so, because the cinematography is spectacular, and the score is great other than one scene that I was like, what is this? And I'll kind of get more into that when I get into the little minuscule problems that I had. But technically, this movie's great. From a direction standpoint, this movie's great. From a writing standpoint and a performance standpoint, this movie's great. The little minor issues I have two. One is there are a few, and both of these issues fall entirely within the first act. Once you get into the rest of the movie, the rest of the movie is fucking phenomenal. So like we're focusing on the first act. There are some tonal inconsistencies. When I was talking earlier about the controlled chaos of Winston Churchill, there are a couple of scenes where it almost feels jolting, like they didn't build to it enough or they didn't set it up enough. One scene in particular I felt and this is the scene where they had the weird score, was like, I don't think how that scene should have felt. I think it was off-putting and sort of out of place in a sense with what had been leading to that scene. It's the scene where Ben Mendelsohn confronts Gary Oldman and says, "I've been invited to ask you to be prime minister." And it was an odd feeling scene, but that could just be me. And the other thing was some pacing stuff at the beginning. Some scenes managed to be too long, and then others were cut off kind of short. That was like an editing thing. That was a little, I don't know, it was a little odd. Like, cuts were weird, and scene beginning and endings were weird. But everything in the middle was great. So it was just the ending and the beginning that was kind of off. Like, certain scenes would start to drag, and you would be like, okay, let's move on, and then they would finally move on, but you would kind of have this sort of like, in certain sequences. Those are my only issues, though. They're very minor, they're very minuscule, they're small, and you will definitely either A, not notice them, or B, not care like I did. Because when you have a great movie, you're willing to excuse the little things. I'm perfectly willing to excuse those little things. This is a well-crafted, well-put-together, great film, and I would definitely recommend getting out to see it, especially if you're looking into Oscar films. Look for it in the Best Picture category. Look for Gary Oldman to win. Unless Timothée Chalamet blows me out of the fucking water, Gary Oldman is winning this Oscar. Kristen Scott Thomas is a possibility. I think screenplay is a possibility. I'd actually like to see how it does at the Golden Globe nominations that are coming out tomorrow, which I'll be doing a video for. Cinematography nomination, production design nomination, all that good stuff. I think this is definitely one to see. I think it's going to be showing up in a lot of different places. Whether it has chances of winning big awards, I think is debatable. I'd like to see how it does in the upcoming month. But yeah, I definitely get out to see this one, especially if you're interested in this kind of subject, like World War II, and I think it's, and especially if you saw Dunkirk, like it's really interesting to see them talking about Dunkirk, and then you think about, man, I saw that. You know, I got to see that in all of the IMAX glory that we did. So yeah, definitely get out to see this movie. It's great. I'd give it a strong 9 out of 10. I really, really, really like this movie. So, what did you guys think? Have you seen Darkest Hour? Have you not seen Darkest Hour? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to be posting my Golden Globe, whether it's a reaction video or a just review video remains to be determined. I'm going to try and do a reaction video in school, but I can't promise how well I'm going to be in class, so I don't know how well that's going to go, because like the last 2 years that I've done Golden Globe reaction videos, I've been able to be home when they were released for like odd reasons. This year that's not the case, and I'm not waiting until I get home to do this video, because I'm going to want to think about it a little more if I do want to do a review video. So I'm going to try and do a reaction video in school, and if it doesn't pan out or doesn't work out, then I'm just going to do a review video when I get home and sort of talk about separate points and what I think is important for the Oscars and what was interesting and all that. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.